All right, everyone. So first up, let's go ahead and talk about cells. What are S2 cells? How do they work? What are they even, right? So this is a major question, and it creates a lot of hassle because Niantic hasn't, explained this to the general public, be it Pokemon Go or whatever. And this is a major problem because people will go out and they'll submit a Pokestop. Guess what? Goes through, you get the letter that says, hey, congratulations, it might or might not be. Well, if it's in the wrong cell, it's going to be the latter. You're going to be like, what's going on? You're going to get frustrated and you're going to stop making stops. If this has happened to you, I can tell you what's going on and I'm going to help you through it. So first off, S2 cells. Originally, they were designed by Google as a way to better load the world map. So imagine if our world, it's a sphere. Imagine if it was laying totally flat, okay? Now, imagine now if you want to basically divide it up, okay? So in order to divide it up, there are these little squares, or they look more like diamonds, and you can divide it up in that way. So the lower the number, the bigger the diamond is. The higher the number, the smaller the diamond is on the map. You get to leaf cells, which are like L30s. So depending on the level, smaller number equals big, larger number equals small, okay? And I'll give you guys an example right here. And the cells that the level that we're going to be concerned about is level 17, which is Pokestops. Now, when you submit a Pokestop, it has to be in its own cell. There are zero exceptions. In the past, what you could do is if there were two pieces of art or like two gazebos in one cell, I would usually, if it was on like the boundary, I would take that one I was going to submit and I would push it just a little bit over the boundary, submit it. And once it went through, I would edit it back over. Here's the thing, you cannot do that anymore. So many people were abusing it that you can no longer move something from a different cell into an occupied cell, okay? You have to leave it in that cell and it has to be alone. One Pokestop or one gem per cell. That is it, okay? So we found our cell. It is totally open. What do? Well, we make sure that it's going to be placed in the right area. You want to make sure that that placement is not going to be over the boundary. I like this site I'm showing you now. It doesn't have the actual Pokestops where they are, but it's close enough to where you can kind of eyeball it. Second thing, I download Ingress because we're not the only fish in the pond. There's Ingress as well. And if you're not seeing something on the map, it might be an Ingress, in which case when people go to review it, guess what? It's going to get marked as a duplicate because it's already in Ingress. So if you're serious about making stops, go ahead and download Ingress. That way you can double check and see what's on the map, what isn't on the map, etc., etc. Okay? So you've checked Ingress. It's not listed on the map. You've checked and you've made sure it's in the right spot. You're going to go ahead and you're going to submit that Pokestop. Last thing, and this is something that you need to be aware of because it's kind of convoluted and again, don't know why Niantic has done this, but when you go to settings, create new Pokestop, you're not actually creating a Pokestop, you're creating a waypoint. This is important because when it comes time to make the description and make the supporting info, you do not want to use the word Pokestop, especially for description, because there are not supposed to be any game-specific entries, okay? Good example, a couple days ago, somebody submitted, it was like a gazebo kind of by a lake, and they said it was like a great place for mudkips to hang out in the shade. That is game-specific. It stands a good chance of being denied, even though it's a legit nomination, because they have game-specific stuff in there. You don't want to do that. In your supporting info, whenever people ask, I always tell them don't mention Pokemon either, because you have other people playing a different game, Ingress. And I'm sure they get tired of seeing people say Pokestop, 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 because even though Pokemon Go is kind of the flagship game for Niantic, a lot of people feel that Ingress has kind of been left in the dust, that it doesn't get, it's, it's just people don't really think it exists in some weird way. And so they actually did it. They went to a lot of trouble. And when Pokemon Go first started, it was because of their due diligence and making those waypoints that we got to use them, because they transferred over to Pokemon Go. So just as kind of a nod and as kind of something, because of the fruits of the labor, we don't say game-specific stuff. Okay? So super important. Do not mention it. Just say whatever. If you're going to say Pokestop, use the word Waypoint, because that's what it is. Okay? All Pokestops are waypoints, but not all waypoints are Pokestops. So you might submit something and it might show up in both Ingress and Pokemon Go, or it might just show up in Pokemon Go, or for some reason, sometimes if you kind of get confused and you put it, because they have different rules than we do, it might just show up as a portal. And so in that case, it can't come back as a Pokestop, all right? So you really, really, really got to be sure when you place these things, because once it's in there, if you try to submit it again, it's going to get rejected as a duplicate. So make sure you know where you're putting it. So now we have our thing we're submitting. We know that it is in its own cell. We know that there isn't a duplicate over on Ingress, and we know it meets criteria. Go ahead and submit it. When you're submitting it, make sure you take a good photo. That means during the day. The only exception is if it is some sort of light up thing where it looks best at night, where you can get a clear picture, but it's different colored lights. I did one, it was for actually a bus depot. There was a really cool artwork and it was all lit up. I took that one at night because it's best at night and it's made for night. So take it during the day unless it's one of those exceptions. Now, secondly, when you're taking the photo, there shouldn't be anybody in the photo. No dogs, people, license plates, nothing that someone can look at and be like, okay, I can go check out their personal info. All right? Don't do it. Make sure there is nobody in that shot. Now, when you take your supporting photo, you can have people, things in the shot because it's not going to be the actual image that's being used. As a courtesy, if there's people around, I try not to get them in any of the photos just because I don't want to freak them out, especially if there's kids around. Parents don't like a grown person, stranger, taking photos with their kids in it. That's not going to fly. So be aware of that. In your supporting photo, though, you need to have proof that there is pedestrian access. Got to show there's pedestrian access. As well, you have to show that it is where it is. So when I was doing a pickleball court, it was a relatively new area, and what I did was I took a photo of it with a pharmacy sign in the background. And that pharmacy sign is super visible, so it's kind of like a point of reference, so people can be like, okay, there's the pharmacy sign, there's the pickleball court. Now, if you live in an area like I do, where there are tons of new developments going in, tons of stuff like that, and it's not on the map, use a Google Sphere. I'm going to put a link to a site that shows you how to make Google Spheres. It's going to be super helpful. That way people won't deny it for not being there because they don't know any better, because they just see a bunch of dirt or something else. So use a Google Sphere if you don't see it on the map, because it's going to probably be denied because people don't want to say yes to something that is somewhere else, okay? And that's it. Make sure in your description you are clear as to why this should be a Waypoint Pokestop. I like to say something like, you can use anything you want. Just make sure people know the reason why. In the description, if it's a piece of art, I'll put the title of the art, that kind of thing. So like if it's a gazebo or a pavilion, I'll say just like a great place to escape the heat, the summer heat, or I'll say, it's a great place to escape the Arizona sun and etc., etc. Be specific, let them know what it is, but do not go too much into detail that where you're saying somebody's name, anything like that. Super important. For your supporting info, this one, I would say something like, I believe this would make for a great waypoint because it allows for the communities to get together and play baseball or play basketball. Or, it's games can go long into the night with the exterior lighting. Be specific, let them know why it should be a waypoint, okay? Once you've done that, you're gonna hit submit. It's gonna go through. It should take, you can wait till you get home, but if you're okay with your data, go ahead and submit it. Generally takes a minute or two, depending on where you are in your connection. As soon as it goes through, it takes about 5 to 10 minutes, but it will appear in your queue. So when you log on to Wayfarer, it'll be in that queue. From there, you can either upgrade or you can leave it alone. Now, pros and cons to either. The pro to upgrading is that obviously it's going to go through faster. You do have to do some work, you have to do some reviews. But with upgrades, it goes to everybody. So everybody that's online or that's doing it is going to see this. Now, that can be great, but it also can be a detriment. Why? Well, if you don't upgrade it, it's just going to be reviewed by the local community. So if it's something like a coffee shop, which we'll get into later, the local community will recognize it and be able to vote on it. Whereas somebody living halfway across the US or whatever world, they won't know what it is, and they might think it's a generic business. So pros and cons to both. If it's something that's obvious, like we'll get into the obvious stuff later, but I usually upgrade it. If it's something that I think outsiders would be unfamiliar with, then I'll leave it as is, okay? And so that pretty much wraps up S2 cells. I'm going to leave a link if you guys have any questions. Remember, the one you're focusing on in the map is L17, that is Pokestops. Hi everyone, welcome back. Lars here with part number 2. We're going to talk about the validity of certain waypoints, what's good and what's bad. If you like what you see, please remember to like and subscribe so I can keep bringing you guys content. Now, first off, I want to start by saying that you should never, ever, ever use what you see around you as precedent for what's good or bad as far as stops are concerned. Now, why do you say that, Lars? Well, things have changed. What was good back in the day is no longer good now. And why? Well, Niantic at the very start rolled out this community-driven program. They wanted everybody to basically make the rules. They wanted the community to decide what was good, what wasn't good. Well, that didn't go so well. So they came back with some guidelines. And so now you might see some stuff that is out there that's a Pokestop that isn't eligible today. So just be aware, and I'm going to give you the rules now so you know, but don't try to submit something that you see out there and then go, well, why isn't it going through? It clearly is a Pokestop. Well, it's because it was eligible back in the day. Now it's not, okay? So, part 1, gimmies. Okay, these are things that can go through easily. Gazebos, ramadas, you see them at parks, those are fine. Any athletic field, just make sure to put the Pokestop marker on the outside. Like if it's a baseball field, I'll put it around the first or third base line, It can be anywhere there. Just make sure it's kind of on the outskirts so people aren't traipsing through the game that's going on, playing Pokemon Go. Playgrounds. Playgrounds are fine. Just make sure to submit the playground as a whole. Don't submit individual pieces, otherwise it will be marked as a duplicate. If there are numerous playgrounds, like a lot of parks will have a major, like the main playground and then like a toddler's playground off to the side, you can submit both of those, that's fine. Just don't go submitting each individual piece inside of that playground, otherwise it will be marked as a duplicate. All right, trail markers. All trail markers are okay, so long as they have the name of the trail and some sort of marking designated it as such, as a trail. Might say like Saguaro Cactus Trail, X amount of miles or kilometers, whatever. Those are fine. You can do every individual one. They should go through. Some people get confused and they think, well, it's not really, like there's a bunch of them, so it's not relevant or whatever, but they're all fine. And they should go through. If they don't go through, I've had a few denied, just resubmit it, they should go through. Churches, any sort of religious establishment, so church, mosques, temples, anything like that is okay. As Niantic said, it's kind of a nod to the spiritual, so those go through absolutely fine. Exercise stations at the park, you see them, there's like the pull-up station, the bench, whatever. Those are fine. Just take a picture of them, submit it, let them know it's an exercise station. You shouldn't have any problems with those. Tree placards, you'll go at the park or at like a botanical garden, and there will be like a little placard that tells you about the tree and some info, as well as like, there's one by us, and it's like a reservoir. It gives you, there's a little placard about the reservoir. Those are fine. Any sort of placard telling you about natural history, they're good. Now this is important because a lot of people make this mistake when they first start. If you see a park and you want to submit the park, you can't just take a picture of the park and be like, hey, this is the park. No, you have to find some signage that designates it as such. So it might be like a welcome sign. It might be a park rules and regulations sign. You can take a picture of it and make that into a stop. That's fine. If there's like a north entrance, south entrance, whatever, you can make each of those. Just don't take a picture of the park and submit it because that won't fly. You need some sort of signage designating it. And of course, any type of art piece. If you see art, it's good. Could be a sculpture, a statue, anything like that. It's okay. So now let's talk about stuff that is okay, but is kind of iffy or hard to get through because a lot of people, for whatever reason, either forget the rules or they haven't really updated with the times, and so they think that we're still stuck back in the day. And for starters, it is subdivision art. Now, subdivision welcome signs are not allowed. They will get rejected almost within 24 hours because we see them all the time on Wayfair and they're just not allowed. However, if there is some sort of art or water feature attached to that, like a metal cactus or a little waterfall, that is fine. Those can go through, but they must be submitted on their own merits. Do not mention the subdivision sign, anything like that, because you're submitting that as its own thing, all right? So, really important that you do that. Restaurants, now this is huge, and they're really hard to get through because way back in the day, Niantic had a little for rejection. One of the options was generic establishment, and pretty much every restaurant got denied. It was becoming such a problem that Niantic said, don't deny every restaurant. If it has some sort of local significance, if it's been around for like 40, 50, 60 years, if it played some important part in history, whatever, then it's okay. It's an okay nomination. If it's hyper local and the whole community meets there, that's fine. But make sure to include that in your supporting info. You need to include if it's won any awards, the history of it, how long it's been in business, all of that stuff, because you don't want to make the reviewer do the legwork because they're going to go, you know what, it must not be important, so I'm going to give it a 1. You need to make sure you include all that info in there. Otherwise, it's not going to go through. It's really hard to get them through, but the more information, the better. All right, and last up second to last up. So, cemeteries, graveyards. If they're, live, if people are being buried there, or if it's recent that people have been buried, don't do it. They're not allowed because you obviously don't want to be disrespectful, and Niantic doesn't want you to be disrespectful. So those are not allowed. The only time it is allowed is if it's a historic person's grave, or if it's a graveyard that's considered like dead, I guess is the best terminology for it, and that is like the last person buried there was like 100, 200 years ago. Then that's fine. You'll see that a lot in the US on the East Coast and in Oregon. There's a few graveyards, cemeteries from the pioneer days, so that's totally fine. They just don't want you making a Pokestop in an area where people could actively be attending a loved one's funeral, something like that, which is not okay. So be advised of that. And last on the list for stuff that is iffy but okay, memorial benches. Now, if it's a but if it's just a memorial bench to someone who was like a family member, it's not okay. It has to be somebody significant to the community. It could be like a president, that's fine, a memorial bench to a president. Somebody at the state level, like a governor, if they had a memorial bench, that's fine. Local level, like an important, someone who was important in the community, like if an officer was killed in line of duty, that's fine. Or a bench celebrating, the city's very first black mayor. Totally fine. Those are all very, very important. But someone's grandma or whatever, it's not important in the community as a whole, and so those are not okay. They have to be somebody important, significant to the community, okay? So those are the 4 kind of iffy ones. And now as far as stuff that isn't okay, and you'll see Wayfair updated, so there are some new options to deny. So location inappropriate would be such places as, clubs where people take out their clothes. Not okay. Any sort of place that sells, in some states it is legal, but any sort of drugs or anything like that that's being sold, or signage, not okay. It's considered inappropriate. So it's not appropriate for all ages. So stay away from nominating anything that has that kind of vibe going. Adult bookstores, don't do it. It's inappropriate, okay, for this game. Sensitive would be, like we talked about earlier, like actual live graveyards would be something that's sensitive. So anything that could be harmful or upset somebody. If you have like a religious institution, that's fine. But if there's an area that's just for that religious group, they don't want people, outsiders, just traipsing on through. So that would be considered sensitive. So anything that could offend or make someone upset, you don't want to do. And use your best judgment on this. It'll be pretty obvious to you guys. Okay, just a few more for location sensitive that I wanted to touch on. Hospitals, you can have nominations a lot of hospitals will have like a healing garden. That's fine. It just cannot obstruct ambulatory services. So they should be able to enter and exit, no problem. Same thing goes for police stations, okay? They should be able to leave and exit, no problem. Now, military bases, and this one is a little bit tricky. If the military base, which they do, has barracks and some sort of, your dining hall, whatever, that's okay for the troops that live there. But what you cannot do is have anything that is in an area that is restricted to base personnel, like in the armory or any place that would be people need to get to and leave quickly. So any sort of residential area within the base is okay, but not the actual restricted areas. Those are not okay. Just wanted to give you guys a heads up because that falls under location sensitive as well as obstructing emergency services. Subdivision signs, as always, are not allowed unless art, as we explained before, and it has to have pedestrian crossing. That means that roundabouts that have art in the middle without any access, don't do it. It will be denied because someone could get hurt trying to cross over there, especially if it becomes a gym. Pools used to be allowed, and they're no longer allowed. I don't know why, but this switch was made a few years ago, but they aren't allowed unless anything has changed, which as far as I know, it hasn't. So pools are not allowed. You can submit the ramadas around the pool, just not the pool itself. I don't know. Let's see. Any sort of movable object or emergency services. So if it can be moved or if it obstructs emergency services, don't do it. All right, and that's the